They were the picture-perfect couple, colleagues, scientists, partners in life. To everyone who knew them, Amber and James Martin were close, loving, and building a future together. But earlier this month, that perfect image was shattered by violence in their apartment in Iowa. Authorities say that James Martin formulated a plan, grabbed a kitchen knife, and stabbed his wife to death. Now those who knew them are left with the haunting question of how does a marriage that seemed so perfect end like this? We're on The Case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. From the outside, it looks like this was the perfect marriage, perfect partnership. Two dedicated medical scientists working side by side in a lab, building a life together at home. But if you follow true crime, you know that often the view that we get from the outside can be incredibly misleading. And in this story, we're talking about a couple that appears to be just that. Now, to their colleagues, the Martins were a picture of a close and loving couple. She was vivacious and kind. He was quieter and reserved, but both of them were incredibly smart and had incredibly good jobs. But early last Friday morning in an Iowa apartment, that image was shattered by violence. We should say that reality was shattered by violence. Authorities allege that behind that seemingly ordinary facade, 47-year-old James Fuller Martin had been formulating a secret plan for hours, a plan they say ended with him grabbing a kitchen knife and repeatedly stabbing his 41-year-old wife, Amber, to death. Now, this is a chilling case that has left friends and former coworkers looking for answers, because the big question is, how does a relationship that does appear so strong to everyone around them end in an alleged act of such brutal and premeditated violence? This is the final post that Amber Martin put on her Facebook page. It is a Happy New Year's post. It's from the night before we started 2026, and you can see there with James wishing everyone a Happy New Year. From the surface, this appeared to be a couple that loved spending time together, and there are still so many questions about what went wrong.
Engine 1, JCAS 1-4, respond to fire alarm. Cross streets are Rock Street and Brown Street. Johnson County Ambulance, JCAS 2-4, respond to penetrating trauma at cross streets of Jones Boulevard and Blue Sage Drive.
926, Sunset.
Go ahead.
You're good to approach. Multiple establishments confirmed that victim. They advise no pulse at this time.
26 copies. Take on 26 is on scene.
That was the call that first responders put out on dispatch via Broadcastify for a penetrating trauma. It brought first responders to the couple's home at around 6:30 in the morning on Friday, January 16th. And what they found inside, according to the criminal complaint that we have, was Amber Martin, this promising scientist, this wife suffering from multiple stab wounds. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Her husband, James, he was there, and he was taken into custody. And according to the complaint, what he allegedly told police at that moment is going to be a key part of the prosecution's case against him. James currently is sitting in a jail in Johnson County, Iowa. He's charged with first-degree murder, and the criminal complaint lays out a stark allegation that this was not a crime of passion or something that happened just in the moment. But authorities believe that this was a deliberate act that was planned in the hours before dawn. Now, I mentioned earlier what James Martin allegedly told police at the scene. It's a key part of the prosecution's case. The criminal complaint reveals what Martin allegedly told police that is at the center of this case, and it's an alleged admission. The complaint states that the defendant did, quote, having malice aforethought, willfully, deliberately, and with premeditation, kill the victim. But I want to show you this key passage from the narrative. This is how it reads. Quote, in the hours leading up to the defendant killing the victim, the defendant formulated a plan to kill the victim. The defendant retrieved a kitchen knife and surprised the victim as she exited another room and stabbed her repeatedly. The defendant was taken into custody at the scene and admitted to stabbing the victim. Now, there is a lot of questions that go deeper than just what we're hearing on the surface in this narrative, in this criminal complaint. The complaint also does mention the evidence was consistent with a witness's observations, though no further information is given about any particular witness account. Who else was in this apartment when all of this allegedly happened? What drove this husband to allegedly kill his wife? What was behind a plan that went on for hours? How long was he planning to do this, allegedly, according to law enforcement? Those are questions that we're still working to figure out. Now, beyond the allegations and the legal documents is the story of a woman who is deeply respected in her field, and she was beloved by those who worked with her. Amber Nicole Martin was a dedicated scientist. At the time of her death, she was the medical laboratory scientist supervisor of microbiology at University of Iowa Healthcare, a position that she had just started last September. She and James had made the trip from Illinois, where they were living, to come and take these big jobs in Iowa. Now, Amber's supervisor told People magazine that Amber was a, quote, very good leader who fit into our team very quickly. And in a heartbreaking detail, that coworker recalled that just the week before, she had told Amber that she could see her taking over her job one day. And in response, Amber turned in the doorway and gave a hand heart sign. But before moving to Iowa, Amber and her husband, James, they both worked at the Quincy Medical Group in Illinois, and she was the microbiology coordinator there, and he was a hematology coordinator. So these are people who are, it appears, incredibly smart, who had very good and respected jobs. Now, Amber's kindness and dedication were recognized years ago. A 2019 Facebook post from Quincy Medical Group shows Amber being honored with their Experience the Difference Award. It goes on to say, quote, Amber Martin, medical technologist, recently received the Quincy Medical Group Experience the Difference Award. Recipients of this award live by the QMG mission, vision, and values, and go above and beyond for their patients and coworkers. The woman who nominated Amber calls her one of the kindest souls I know. And she shares that it is who she is and how she interacts and pours out of her. That was the Amber Martin that her colleagues and friends knew, a person who was smart, kind, vivacious, a woman who poured herself into her work and her community. The news of Amber Martin's death and the allegations against her husband sent shockwaves through two tight-knit medical communities, one in Iowa and then one back in Quincy, Illinois. The consistent theme from those who knew them, though, it's utter disbelief. In a statement to Muddy River News, a local paper, Amber's former colleague who trained Amber at Quincy Medical Group has struggled to reconcile the couple's public image with the crime now alleged to have happened inside their home in Iowa. She told the outlet, quote, Amber was such a wonderful woman. She was vivacious, kind, and loved by all coworkers. Jim was quieter and more reserved. This murder is beyond the comprehension of those who knew them when they worked at QMG. They seem to be such a close and loving couple. I cannot imagine what transpired to change their relationship so much. And that sentiment of a close and loving couple was echoed in the profound grief expressed by her current team in Iowa. Amber's supervisor provided a statement to that outlet, Muddy River News, that was also shared with People magazine, where she said, my entire staff and I are shocked and horrified by Amber's death. She was sweet, smart, and had an amazing personality. She had only been with us since September, but we all feel like we had known her forever. Our community in the field of clinical microbiology will not be the same without her. Now, the question of what happened behind closed doors, what might have transpired to change their relationship so much, what drove this man to allegedly kill his wife, those questions remain in a haunting way unanswered, and questions that are still at the center of this case. In putting this story together, I typed James Martin's name into truthfinder.com, and nothing came up when it came to any sort of criminal history. It did show that he used to live in Quincy, Illinois, and it showed Amber Martin as his wife. Now, here at Law&Crime, we partner with Truthfinder for the public record searches that we do for our stories. It saves us research time so we can focus on reporting crime, not paperwork. And you can use Truthfinder as well. You type in a name to find addresses, criminal history, and more. It is our go-to tool for checks, and it's one of the largest search services in the United States. With a subscription, you get unlimited confidential searches to check on new neighbors, maybe vet people you meet online, or find someone to reconnect with. Even you can look up registered sex offenders nearby or do a background check on yourself. Stay informed, stay safe, check public records with Truthfinder now at truthfinder.com/OTC. Joining us now to talk more about this case is retired NYPD detective, also co-host of the Gold Shields show, Tom Smith. Always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thank you for being with us. You know, this case, and in some ways we've seen cases like this before where it's the perfect couple. It's the people who have the Facebook posts where it looks like they're totally in love. But then you have this, terrible alleged case of violence where this woman, Amber Martin, loses her life. How much does, knowing that this was a scene, it was a stabbing, the suspect is on scene, there was apparently also a witness, how much does looking into the backstory of this couple and what potentially went wrong, how much of that does that really matter when it comes to building the case?
Well, it doesn't really matter. I mean, you're focused on the facts of the case as an investigator or detective, the evidence, who did it, and you lock them up. But you want, because of the impending trial or any criminal justice proceedings that happen, you want the evidence and the background of to what happened as far as the motive goes, because it just makes for a stronger case. So you're going to look into their backgrounds. You're going to do a ton of interviews with family members, friends, coworkers, anyone who had anything to do with them to get an idea of what was going on in their lives.
Because in this case, not only is it surprising because you look at what appeared to be a very happy couple and you have the friends, the coworkers who have said that, they're just incredibly shocked that this could happen. At the same time, you have, according to police documents, that James Martin allegedly planned to kill Amber Martin and specifically said in the hours leading up to her death that there was something premeditated. This wasn't spur of the moment in the eyes of police. Now, it's very general in some ways because we don't know what that planning consisted of. But when you hear hours, this wasn't something, he was planning on it for months or weeks or days, but they specifically said hours. What does that tell you?
It was planned, but it was a spur of the moment. It wasn't like you just laid out. It wasn't planned over a long period of time. And how they probably came to that was maybe a Google search. He might have been searching for things online. And we've seen it so many times. We've done cases together, Chris, of Google searches of cleaning up crime scenes, what a stabbing wound can do, whatever it might be, that probably led detectives to make that determination of it being planned, but not over a long period of time.
The other part of it, too, with the hours leading up, the arrest happened or law enforcement was called to this apartment in Iowa, in Johnson County, Iowa, around 6:30 in the morning, which is, pretty early. And if you think of the hours leading up to it, what was going on overnight, we don't have a lot to go with other than the timeline of information. But when you hear, that's the time of day that all of this allegedly happened, what does that tell you?
Well, again, you want to look into what happened the night before. That's going to be interesting, of what happened the previous night, an argument, something at work, whatever it might be. But then, like I said, those possible Google searches that took place on his phone or on a computer were probably within the overnight hours. And that's why they came to that determination of when this might have been planned out and then taken forward into actually committing the crime.
Because then the other part where you're reading through the criminal complaint, and sometimes these are very detailed at this point of an investigation. Other times we're getting, little bits and pieces of information, but there was allegedly a witness. And there's no saying at this point of who that witness was. But in a domestic case like this, what are some of the probable categories in your career when you've come across a witness for something that has happened, from what we understand, inside an apartment, and there's this third person who was allegedly there? What are some of the categories of people that can show up in cases like this?
Yeah, it's interesting how they categorized it. They didn't say eyewitness, they just said a witness. So it could have been someone in another apartment who overheard an argument, who overheard a threat, who overheard the actual altercation and the murder. We don't know whether this victim yelled or screamed or knocked something over in her apartment that triggered someone to listen or to take note of what was going on. Now, that could be a witness. It could be a phone call or a text message that the victim made to someone right beforehand, to the effect of, he's really mad, he's going to kill me, whatever it might be. We've seen all cases like that. So those can be all kind of witnesses. But like I said, the interesting thing was they didn't say eyewitness to the murder, just the simple term witness.
Yeah, and we'll see what comes out there, from the public, and it's probably an unfair kind of viewpoint that we have on the outside of these investigations. But you think, okay, called to the scene, there's the husband. This is pretty much a slam dunk case. We know who did it. But when it comes to an investigation and what you have to prove in court, it's much more than that, as you know. What are some of the challenges, maybe the blind spots in cases like this, where on the surface it does seem like pretty closed case and not much of a whodunit? What are some of the things that you have to do when you're investigating to make sure that you do find every piece of information you need that a prosecutor can use to get a conviction?
Absolutely. You just said it. You need to start the trial prep as soon as you walk into that apartment. Before anything is done, you start preparing for the trial, which means how you get a statement from him, making sure Miranda warnings are given, the collection of evidence and make sure it's pure and it's okay, and the transfer of evidence to one place to another. Any search warrants that had to be taken into getting social media, getting into computers or phones, you want to make sure those are airtight. Because listen, defense attorneys have a job to do. And when you have such a slam dunk case, there's always something they can come up with. And most of the time, it's going to be directed at the police of some sort of thing they did wrong, or they didn't follow a procedure, or the evidence was mishandled, anything like that. So as soon as you get to a scene like that, you have to start preparing for the trial. And hopefully they did all that and all the bases are covered. And like you just said, this is a slam dunk.
Now, when it comes to the background of this couple, they had moved to this part of Iowa, I think in the last 5 months or so, from Illinois. Again, people felt that they were this close and loving couple. In domestic cases that you have investigated in your career, how common is it that it is that perfect couple, which is a cliche that often isn't true, but as opposed to the cases where I know that we've talked about other ones where you look at someone's rap sheet and you're like, why is this relationship still going? How often is it the one that does appear on the surface to come out of the blue?
A lot. I mean, you see it quite often because, what you see in the public or at parties or whatever is not necessarily what's going on behind closed doors or in, someone's house. And you don't know, you may know the people, you don't know what's going on in their marriage or their relationship. And a lot of times, like you just said, we've talked about cases like this, that it is that perfect couple where something goes wrong on one end and it ends in a tragedy like this.
Yeah, and James Martin's someone, when we looked him up, not really any criminal history we couldn't find any criminal history for him. So you don't know how much interaction he's had with law enforcement. When you're questioning someone, a suspect, in a case like this for a very serious crime where if found guilty, he could go to prison for the rest of his life. How does the questioning differ with someone like this, who's maybe speaking to a police officer in this type of experience for the first time and last time ever, compared to someone where you realize this is a person who's maybe spent time in prison before, they've been interrogated before, they've spoken with police? How do the approaches differ with someone like this who appears to have never spoken to a police officer potentially ever?
Yeah, they're dramatically different. And you know what? As a detective, in our view, you take advantage of it. You do everything right and you advise him of his rights. But if he is willing to talk to you, you take advantage of his inexperience with dealing with law enforcement. And you categorize and list the questions in a certain way that it builds up to an admission of what you want, and a clarification of what happened, even going backwards, the beginning of the night, the beginning of the day before, whatever that led up to this. But you sure want to take advantage of someone's inexperience when you're dealing with an interrogation like this.
And apparently he admitted under oath or after being read his rights on the scene, he admitted to this stabbing. Going back to this seeming like not much of a whodunit kind of case, when you have that admission and you're still gathering some of the forensic evidence on the scene, still piecing together what happened, but I guess how much of the case you're building is based off the fact that you have the person who you believe did it telling you after they've been read their rights that they did commit this crime.
Oh, that's the perfect investigation. That's what you always want. You always want the bad guy on the scene to put his hands up, say, I did it. Those are great. But you can't take advantage of that. You can't take that for granted, I should say, and just kind of gloss over some things. You really have to still go by the book and your checklist of what needs to be done in an investigation to make sure nothing happens in court and no technical things go wrong and he gets let out or something gets dismissed during the trial as far as evidence or a statement goes. So you still have to make sure you are on target with all your information.
And looking at what we know about what happened inside this apartment, you have, not only do they believe that he planned this for hours leading up to when it allegedly happened, the way they say it happened, where they accuse him of ambushing his wife with a knife as she exited a room and, catching her off guard, as opposed to this being some domestic disturbance and then someone in the heat of the moment just grabs a knife. Not that that would be any better, but I guess what type of criminal does this? Just in like when you go through and there's never an excuse, there's never a reason as to why, but someone who not only plans it, but then it's someone who finds his wife of several years, grabs a knife, and then ambushes her in that moment.
It is brutal, and it is a monster because stabbing is brutal and it is up close and personal because, most of the time, unless you have a direct stab wound into the heart, it is a torturous death because a lot of the stab wounds are not going to be fatal at first. So the more that goes on, the more torture this person goes through. And it is an evil act, and it is personal, full of rage most of the time when you're dealing with stabbings. And this is no different, especially hiding and waiting for her to enter a room and then, like you said, ambushing her is just another level of evil.
It is. And it's one of those things where I'll never understand it for anybody who does it, but for someone who no one would have ever suspected, and then there's just this evil plan behind the surface, it leads you to that question that's really important, but maybe you don't need it for a conviction of motive and why something like this happens. And walk us through because we know what a motive is, and we know eventually once police say, okay, we believe that this happened. Maybe they were in debt. We don't know what their financial situation was. Who knows what their relationships were like? Who knows what they were doing online? All of that. Like, what specifically is that moment? What is the bar that you have to hit? Where maybe they were in debt, but that wasn't the reason that he did it. But maybe it was something else. Like, what is the bar that you reach where you say, like, you and the team of detectives that are working on this are being like, yes, we believe this is the motive. This is something that caused this to happen.
Yeah, the interesting thing about this, Chris, and other cases that I've worked on, it may not be one thing. It may be a collection of things that added up on top of him. And you just rattled off a bunch of probables. Their financial, their personal relationship, was something going on, behind the scenes. Did something happen at work that set this off? I mean, you can literally have a list of motives, and all of them mean something in their own way. But once you find one, you're not stopping. You're going to just write that down and take note of it, but you're going to continue to look because probably in most cases it's more than one thing, and I guarantee you it's that in this case as well.
Yeah, and one of them, like I was thinking, just looking through this, is they recently moved to Iowa from Illinois, so like not a cross country move, but they left one life behind, started a new one near where the University of Iowa is. I mean, so in some cases, can it be something as like on the surface as small as that? I mean, it's a major life change, but not something that you would assume could be linked to a murder. But those things get stressful, I'm sure. And I know I'm just speculating here, but even in some cases, is it a small thing that you would not associate with a crime that sometimes can lead to something like this?
Oh, absolutely. It could be, like I said, it could be anything. It could be the smallest thing that most of us will shake our head at and go, wow, that's what set him off to kill his wife. We don't know. And we also have to get a check into his maybe mental background. Was there any therapy in the past, anything that went on with him on that level that they need to look into as well, that the smallest little trigger set this all in motion.
And going back, just as we close with some of the, the perfect couple part of it, which does sound like a Dateline episode where it's not, it's kind of cliche, like, and we see it in true crime all the time where it's, oh my gosh, they look like the perfect couple. And we're guilty of that here as well. How quickly typically though, in these cases, is it, yes, they were the perfect couple. And then a few follow-up questions. It's, well, maybe things weren't going as smoothly as we thought.
Oh, no doubt about it. And like, that's what I said. Once you start interviews, once you start looking at backgrounds, especially the interviews, are going to shed a light on this about what they were really like behind the scenes. And you know what? There might be even one or two people that pop up in these interviews that's not going to be surprised something like this happened.
Yeah. And it's just a terrible story. This woman, Amber Martin, who had a very bright career in science and was very successful, it seemed, and loved by a lot of people. And then now you have her husband, who seemed to be this great partner, but certainly with what he's accused of, that was allegedly not the case. And we'll see what happens next. Tom Smith, retired NYPD detective, co-host of the Gold Shield Show. Thank you as always for being with us on Law and Crime. It's great to have you.
It's always a pleasure, Chris. Thanks so much.
James Martin has yet to enter a plea on the charges that he allegedly killed his wife. That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify, and now you can watch episodes of On the Case on Peacock. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.